And welcome back to The Way of the Wandering Wizard. I am, as always, Robert Andrew Meredith Kennedy, although most folks know me as Bob the Wizard. And I am, as always, a pure and open channel for the finest vibrations of divine love and light made manifest here in service to Gaia and those who travel with her. My last little video, I was waxing lyrical and sharing my black dog days as I left a 16-year career at the MOD. I thought on a little bit of a lighter note, I'd share a few tales of how I avoided the depression, the same way that everybody does when work's tough. We go on holiday. So I thought I'd share a few tales, a few fishy tales, of the noble art and the joys of scuba therapy. Around the time of the millennium, after having done our Reiki, we decided to follow in the footsteps of our friends who always holidayed in Turkey. Wonderful little village, as it was then, called Kalkan. Now, over the last few years at the fort, Kalkan became, certainly for me, a little bit of a home from home. Something about Turkey that really just resonated with me. At the time I wasn't heavily into past lives, but probably had lived there. But there was just something about the culture, the architecture, that just was resonant. I absolutely fell in love with the country. As well as visiting all the sites, jumping off of a mountain in Ula Deniz. Oh, I probably should tell you that one as well. We went out with our friends who, as divers, was pretty much how they spent their days on the dive boat. Now, as a child, I snorkeled for an air sign, a Gemini. I'm remarkably at home in the water. I always loved it. Most of my holidays in the summer, my memories we were always in the sea. As soon as we started holidaying in Cornwall, mask, snorkel and fins. And I was in amongst the fish and swimming around in my element, loving every minute of it. Now, still had the mask, so as they were diving, we were snorkeling around over the top of them. Well, their dive instructor and a good friend, and a phenomenal salesman, basically over the course of a lunchtime, sat down and convinced us that maybe a tri-dive would be in order. So we'd watched them all getting kitted up often enough, followed the same form, put on all the tanks, very Jack Cousteau. I was all very excited. I'd seen this as a kid on the telly. I was going to get to have a go. My dad, the great tribal chief, had indeed been one of the first scuba divers within the RAF, or had an opportunity to, when he was serving in Cyprus. My aunt and uncle were amongst the first scuba divers in Tunbridge Wells. They joined BSAC, I still have their dive knife on the wall. So it might have been in the blood a little bit. I mean, I stepped off the back of the boat, giant stride, and classic newbie, absolutely no air in my jacket because I hadn't listened properly, and sunk gracefully to the bottom. But being a snorkeler, I knew how to equalise. Basically stood on the bottom of the sea, looking about, thinking, that's pretty cool. Friends swam down, the standard diver's okay, and I looked around for the good lady, who was still on the surface, appearing to be a little flappy. Being a fire sign, she might not be quite as home in the water. Well, gazing into the eyes of our good friend and dive instructor, typical Turkish man that he was, he charmed her to the bottom of the sea, and that started the bug, the diving bug. From that point on, we were hooked to sign straight up for the PADI course, did our diving, did our open water on the next holiday out. I absolutely loved the freedom of diving. One, there's noise. Obviously, it's a sea's remarkably noisy place, particularly when you've got earrings that rattle. But in comparison, it was peaceful. It sort of sat. Strangely, diving didn't seem to be sort of this high-speed, high-impact sport. It was all about relaxing, controlling your breathing, gently sinking down when everybody had laid around on the surface and was in oneness. A bit of a hippie dive school. Having passed our open water, we went on to advanced, as you would. Now I bring diving up for another reason, because it is absolutely, I believe, key to the survival, or part of my survival while I was on the road. Now I'll throw this in at about the right time. Most people, me in particular, after a while of doing something and applying myself to it, I got quite cocky. We've got a few dives under our belts. I was still diving with, hired equipment. But I had got myself an amazing diving watch. So it was doing all the clever dive profiling for me. I was very impressed and very keen to get it into the water. Not a fairly standard dive, really. Down the anchor chain, swimming around a seamount, and on our return, there was no boat. Well, the anchor chain was there, and there was a really strange noise. Could hear the rattle of a chain looking up, thankfully in a distance. The anchor chain came sailing off the bottom of the boat and re-hit the seabed. Oh, well, that's noisy. There was a little moment of, oh, hang on, you're going to drop an anchor on us. All went well. At that point, I made a stupid decision. I decided to swim back down and inform a following group that the anchor chain had moved and it was now in a different position. And in doing so, managed to follow the standard dive profile of going down and then gently coming up and then down and then up, which put my watch into a little bit of a head spin. By the time I got back to the anchor chain, checking our gauges, I thought, oh, that air's starting to get below the 50 bar mark. Best we'd head up. Now as we reached the chain and started our ascent, I took a deep breath. And basically what came through my regulator was a little damp. Spluttered a little. Went to take another breath, and what came through my regulator was water, and my gauge just fell to 0. To say I hit a bit of a panic moment was a bit of an understatement. Definitely that moment of, oh dear. I managed to get hold of this. All good divers in buddy pairs. Tan gave me her spare air. So the good lady was breathing off her tank. Looking at her tank, she was low as well. Now, in my agitated state, I handed her my camera and indicated that she should go up and I would try and sort things out and find another diver. They were already coming towards us, clearly seeing that something was up. I think Tam must have thought that I was giving her the camera and about to sink to the depths. Either way, she went up to the boat. I then, looking around, saw one of the dive guides and basically torpedoed myself towards him, frantically signalling out of air. Now, dive with us enough, I was a relatively relaxed human being. I was certainly quite relaxed underwater. And if memory serves, he said he knew that I had a problem because my eyes were the size of saucers. Another source of air, still at some depth, maybe 15, 20 metres. Well, he was a good dive guide and he got plenty of air on board. I was literally puffing through it. He was trying to slow my ascent, I was trying to push him to the surface. My watch was going crazy and beeping. And that moment, the first time in my life actually, at that time, everything started to get a little bit very, very real, very, very overloaded. Once we got up to a depth, Tal had arrived on the surface and they'd dropped a tank down. It was normally standard practice. As it happened in that particular, the current had picked up, the boat had moved, had to re-anchor, and obviously he'd lifted his tank. As it hit the water, I'm now looking at the tank. For some reason in my head, if I broke the surface of the water, I'd instantly have the bends, end up a quivering wreck and be paralysed for life, if not dead. That was not the case at all. I had minutes on the surface if I'd have been sensible, but at the time, that wasn't how my head was working. I was definitely having a bit of a flap. So I decided to head. Couldn't take any more air from the guide, so I was definitely heading towards the bottom of the boat. We got close, and I shot across. Assuming, as always, that the tank would be off. They'd actually put it on. I managed to very carefully shut the valve off, put the regulator in my mouth and took another deep breath of seawater. The first thought that went through my head was they'd sent an empty tank down. Is this my day sort of moment? And then I looked down at the gauge, saw that there was pressure in there, sorted my head out, opened it up and started breathing from the tank while hanging underneath the boat. It took me a little while to get myself back under control. Our dive instructor swam down. I mean, he'd swum a more extreme profile than me. His watch was clear, but there was no way that I was going back up. I absolutely had to control my fear of being underwater and of, it wasn't that close, that sensation of almost drowning. That sounds a bit of an exaggeration, but it's a body response. So I hung underneath the bottom of the boat and basically put myself through all the various drills. Flooded my mask, cleared my mask, all of the stuff that we're taught how to do to dive while I ran drills until I got myself back into some semblance of the calm person that most folk normally see. I popped up to the surface of the boat, sort of laid there, climbed out, distinctly shaky with friends very concerned. After about an hour, put a tank on, I was back in the water again. Clearly didn't traumatise me that much, but it was definitely that moment of the first time in this life that I genuinely felt that overload and that immediacy of life. Now, sitting down with the diving instructor, as I said, a great friend, part fish. I mean, literally, one of these dives experience like you wouldn't believe as a commercial diver, deep sea saturation diver. And his chat stuck with me, which was, if you find yourself in that situation, the more that you can stay calm, the more that you can calm your breath, the greater your chance of survival. Now, I'd held my breath, flapped and panicked a little bit. Did all right, I'm still here. But it absolutely stuck with me. And strangely on the road, his voice very clearly reminded me, as I was bleeding out, to stay calm. The more that I could stay calm, keep my heart rate down, the greater my chance of survival. So, would I have survived without being a scuba diver? Possibly not. That came at a perfect point for me in my dive career. I got cocky. I thought I was invincible, kit always works, there's no such thing as kit failure. I could deal with anything that was thrown at me. And clearly I needed to go back and rethink things through. And it made me a more cautious and sensible diver. I went on and we dived for years, almost up until when the little ones came along. Up until when the little ones came along. As well as those great holidays, and the love of Turkey. And all of that wonderful relaxation being in those spaces brought me. Did give us a great opportunity as we progressed in our diving career. We went off to dive in Egypt. Been to Egypt a couple of times, strangely not to see the pyramids or any of the ancient sites, which part of me would love to see, but off to deep deserts. I mean, these beautiful, literally stunning, and as I said, I'm thankful that we dived at a time before our environment had changed the way it has over the last decade or so. I sincerely hope that I get in the future to take my children to go and see something before we wreck it. That'll be one for a different lecture. Now, I found diving, so I apply spirituality to all of my activities, that the breathing with diving worked well with my breathing and my meditative practices. I absolutely loved the neutrally buoyant feeling of being able to rise and fall with a breath. Swimming over seabeds, just a breath in, rising. It was freedom. I saw some amazing sights. We saw amazing sights. Spirals of sharks. Some of the most amazing things I saw about this big, the nudibranchs. It became a bit of an obsession. Now, I'll go on to cover photography therapy later on another subject, but I'm a keen photographer. Underwater photography really floated my boat. To be able to bring back a record of what we'd seen underwater certainly had a resonance in my later career. As I said, short aside into diving, probably the most spiritual moment of diving which I'll share before closing this little chapter out was when we were diving in Egypt. Now at the time, we were clearly Reiki masters and involved in all of that opening of a part society. A good friend, sadly passed, Dr. Horace Dobbs, had been exemplary in putting forward dolphin therapy for anybody or for people that required healing, and particularly children with difficulties, physical difficulties, disabilities, mental disabilities. Through his work he came to know of a dolphin called Olin, who swam off of a bay in New Weber in the Sinai. And as part of the work of what became the Dolphin Dome, funds were raised to put a young lad into the sea with a wild dolphin. Now many of the Bedouin who carried other injuries swam with her regularly, and she seemed to be a real ambassador dolphin. Maybe she was a bit of a dolphin outcast or a dolphin mystic that went off to try and communicate with humans. Who knows? The team wanted somebody to take pictures for one, and two, to provide some diver safety. As me and the missus were qualified, we volunteered to self-fund and join them on their adventure. Having flown out and travelled through the night, as is inevitable with these cases, the dolphin's a wild dolphin. Some days she was in, some days she was out. If she was out, which was the majority of the week, we took a perfect opportunity to go diving in a stunning series of dives. They're on my imagery website. I'll give you the link sometime. One day we got the call. Olin was in the bay, everybody was there, and so we decamped. We didn't have time to take tanks, unfortunately, but we had snorkels and cameras. And so the whole group went into the sea. As Olin, now with a calf, she had her own little baby, brought her baby in to go and play with the humans while she went off to do her magical work with the young lad in question who was in basically a floating ring. Now, as I said, it's dolphins, certainly in my mind, are as sentient as we are. I had some profound moments with that dolphin after she could literally feel the ultrasound buzzing as she worked out what was going on. She swam alongside the young lad, visibly just calmed. Something was going on. There was definitely something going on. Make of it what you will, but it was a profound moment. As she swam away, I swam with her. We'd been warned we didn't touch a wild dolphin. Powerful animals. But couldn't resist, just put the hand up, resting on her fin, as I'd watched in the children's television programmes as a child growing up. Strangely warm. And looked her in the eye, and there was something. If you've ever had that opportunity to look a dolphin in the eye, as I said, there is a sentience there. It's not the same as us, by a long way, but there is a sentience there. I don't know, I like to think as I swam along, giving her a bit of Reiki, she may be giving me a bit of dolphin Reiki. And off she went to the rest of the group. Her baby, on the other hand, was still playing. So I thought I'd go and get some pictures. What kind of an opportunity is this close to a dolphin? Wild dolphin. Baby was playing, and they genuinely do play. There are tales told of dolphins, all kinds of intelligence. A little aside told to me by the great Horace. There is an example of a captive dolphin with a big glass wall, and apparently there was a tourist stood there with a cigar, back when you could smoke in public, blowing smoke at the glass. And this young dolphin watched him blowing smoke at the glass, swam round, took a mouthful of milk from the mum, swam back to the glass, and blew the milk back at the man. Anecdotal story of dolphin intelligence. I'll be honest, my experience with the baby was altogether different. She got a little piece of kelp and was basically playing chase. The water wasn't that deep, 11, 12 metres, certainly as deep as I could free dive. And so I'd swum down with her, spiralling down, and then suddenly realised, looking up, it was quite deep. The standard panic diver response again. Feeling like a mad thing, back up to the surface, and this young dolphin literally broke the water by the side of me, and as only dolphins can do, cackled and laughed, literally laughing in my face. After, I don't know, half an hour, maybe not quite as much as that, her work done, she took her baby back out, and we saw her again a couple of times. Now I have to say that experience flooded my Mars. There's something emotional about swimming with dolphins. Any time that I've been diving and we've dived with dolphins, and as soon as they accompany a dive boat, everyone's off the back to swim with them. It's an emotional response with a sentient creature. Probably something we ought to be looking after. So there we go. A little aside and a little light, without bursting into immense holiday stories of my family and other tales in Turkey. And so I must finish on probably a bit of a happy moment, because I promised him I'd share this story. Heading back to Turkey after a series of what the boys had been doing, some deep diving, we had retired to our favourite Turkish restaurant. Nice. Classic Turkish food, sitting on the floor, low leather cushions, everybody relaxed outdoors. It's a good way to live and a wonderful way to off-gas after a day's diving. Oh, for some reason, one of our party had been distracted down at the harbour and was late to table. Arriving up the top of the hill after diving takes it out of you. There's the depth, the off-gassing, the beer or two on the way back up. Well, anyway, on arriving at this rather lovely restaurant, said brother flopped himself down onto one of the leather cushions, whereupon the seam split and the stuffing exploded out the back, covering an American family who were having an authentic Turkish dining experience with little bits of foam and goat hair. Now clearly, it might not sound that amusing, it was genuinely the funniest thing that I think I'd ever seen. Several of us were seen literally rolling down the hill laughing, while an indignant American mum brushed bits of foam out of her children's hair and tried to get it off the dinner while the staff rushing to try and get them fresh food. As we rolled down saying, "Well, do something, Donald." He'd said, took one look at the size of us and decided to retire gracefully. Said it was a genuinely funny moment. As always, thank you for listening to a little aside, as a little countenance to my Black Dog days. Some experiences of diving and hopefully a little insight into the spirituality of dolphins. Take care, go well, and blessed be.